Hi, I've been trying to make this video for a few days now, but actually Trump now himself has come forward and put a parallel between the Kavanaugh and Khashoggi case himself. So this actually works even more in favour of the presentation that I'm going to deliver here. And I apologise, yes, it is just a podcast and I can't go on to links because my Bandicam's playing up at the moment and it's taking, there's a time lapse between the link actually appearing on the screen and what I'm saying about each particular link. So I'm just going to stay on this page. And before I start, I'll here send my full condolences and empathy with all of Jamal Khashoggi's family and friends, and especially to his fiancée, of this terrible event that's happened, this terrible, well, it is a crime, isn't it? And also my empathy fully to Dr. Christine Blasey Ford, full empathy and respect to you for your immense courage for coming forward. Now I'm going to give a presentation here that is going to clarify the whole situation of this innocent before guilty, okay? Now, to start with, we'll start with the Kavanaugh case at the Senate hearing in which Kavanaugh is being accused of a sexual attack against Dr. Blasey Ford, who gives testimony about that and also about his character at that time when he was 17 years old and she was only 15 years old, herself a victim survivor of an attack by Kavanaugh, and also his friend she cites as a witness, his best friend, who was in the room at the time of that attack. Apparently he was stood by the door, although she doesn't cite him as specifically taking part in the attack. He was part of it in the sense of they both were also laughing at her distress, that was part of it. So you're talking about an element of sadism there, aren't you? That Kavanaugh and his friend at that time were the kind of people who take pleasure, find it fun to hurt somebody. And obviously the motive there was, you know, to commit a sexual attack against Dr. Blasey Ford, who managed to escape. So just the very fact that the Senate held the hearing in the first place means that there was enough evidence there for people to be concerned about the suitability of Judge Kavanaugh being made Supreme Court Justice. If that evidence was not going to be taken seriously, if it was the kind of evidence that could just be thrown out, then you should not have had the hearing and put Dr. Blasey Ford through the trauma of that, and also Judge Kavanaugh. So the very fact the Senate had a hearing means that the evidence needs to be taken seriously. And therefore, in such a situation, because we're talking about historical crime, you know, you're not going to have fingerprints, video recordings, photographs. We have the evidence that is available to us. So on Dr. Blasey Ford's side, the evidence is her testimony as a professional woman who does not have a track record of committing perjury on oath. She's not a man-hating feminist, and she's not, there's no evidence to show that she's some sort of ardent campaigner for the Democrat Party to the extent that she's prepared to bring a malicious prosecution allegations against Kavanaugh purely because she wants to help the Democrats prevent yet another Republican landing on the Supreme Court Justice panel. Okay, so she's also of the same background, social background, as Judge Kavanaugh himself. They went to the same privileged high school together. They're part of that same social background. So between the two, there's quite an even balance between the witnesses. They're both professional people. Kavanaugh a judge, Christine Blasey Ford a doctor. So on that level, there's an even playing field, isn't there? There's an even balance. Now, the evidence on the side that she's brought to the table are her therapist notes that she years ago disclosed exactly what happened to her. The therapist has recorded those in the notes and confirmed the damages in keeping with that allegation, with that disclosure. The psychological and emotional damages that impacted on Dr. Blaseyford for so long that even years later it was causing problems within her marriage. She's also taken a lie detector test, which, alright, courts don't usually accept lie detector tests, but for the sake of this hearing it has to be counted as evidence that at least she was willing to take a lie detector test, and actually she did pass the lie detector test, which states very clearly that she was honest in her accusation against Kavanaugh. Then we also have other witnesses, 20 witnesses, perhaps more, who've come forward to confirm everything that Dr. Blaseyford, her account of the kind of character that Brett Kavanaugh was at that time in his teenage years. A drunken, loutish person that has no respect for females. And we also have another victim survivor who's come forward stating that yes, Judge Kavanaugh did sexually assault me, and other witnesses to confirm that yes, indeed he did do that. Apparently it was all around the school of what he'd done to that lady. And we also have the testimony of his roommate who confirms exactly the kind of character that Dr. Blaseyford described to that Senate hearing. And also, she's also cited, like I say, Judge Kavanaugh's best friend, Mark Judge, as a witness who was present and actually part of the attack, to the extent that he was laughing with Kavanaugh at Dr. Blaseyford's distress at that time. And she says that was one of the worst aspects of it, that they both enjoyed, they took pleasure in her pain and distress. And then also we have the yearbook, don't we, in which Justice Kavanaugh's talking about the Devil's Triangle, boofing, being part of, what was it, the Renati, Illuminati, which refers to another young girl that obviously, according to that club, they'd all had some sexual involvement with her. And then also we have Mark Judge's book that he wrote years ago, and he refers to his friend Bart O'Kavanaugh. And we do now know, according to letters, notes and things that have come forward, physical evidence, that Bart himself has written, and he signs himself Bart. So that was his nickname while he was at school, Bart Kavanaugh. And we also have the testimony of Mark Judge himself, who states that he can't remember. When he was asked about the incident, don't forget he's included in this accusation now as participating in a sexual attack against a young 15-year-old girl, Christine Blaseyford. He has come forward, he refused to attend the Senate hearing and swear on oath one way or another whether or not this incident happened. He says he can't remember, which actually is more evidence, isn't it? Because you would have thought that his best friend, Kavanaugh's best friend, there he is, you know, his friend's being accused of these things, he's been nominated for Supreme Court judge, that's hanging in the balance there. He cannot swear on oath one way or another to confirm whether his friend Brett had actually committed this or not. All he can say is, I can't remember. So that itself is evidence, and it does strongly suggest, doesn't it, that if the incident did happen, then obviously he wishes to defend himself. He doesn't want to be known as somebody who participated in such activities in his teenage years. Or perhaps he has developed and grown actually developed a conscience that he isn't prepared to perjure himself on oath and say no, it definitely didn't happen, to support his friend. And then we also have the fact that Judge Kavanaugh was himself at that time on a path into law education, wasn't he? Because he later became a lawyer, a judge, you know, because that was his path, that was where he was going. So somebody who had obviously even then probably basic knowledge of the law, and that tells us something about why he included his friend in that attack. The friend didn't participate in the attack himself, but he was in the room and participated it to the extent that he was enjoying that fun, okay, of attacking a young 15-year-old girl. Now, why would Kavanaugh include his friend? Obviously, there is a reason for that, for somebody that is on the path to law, because 2 witnesses against 1 witness means that the case wouldn't even be investigated had Christine Blasey Ford at that time gone to the police and reported them. The police would have gone and interviewed these 2 privileged young men, and they both would have said, no, it didn't happen, she's lying, she's just made it up, blah, blah, blah. Sorry, love, we can't even investigate it because it's 2 witnesses against 1. And it just won't hold in a court of law, so there's nothing that we can do. And then Christine Blasey Ford, as a 15-year-old girl at that time, would have had to deal with the embarrassment and, you know, of this being made public, that everybody talking about it. She's a young 15-year-old girl, so it's perfectly understandable why she didn't come forward at the time. But faced with the prospect of having this man who obviously hasn't changed, you know, according to the evidence, which I'll come into in a moment, she wishes to protect the American public from the serious danger, actually, of having such a person sitting on the Supreme Court. So that is what has moved her to come forward and to deliver her testimony to the Senate. Was purely, her motive was purely for protecting the American people, and like I say, we have no evidence to suggest otherwise. And we also have the testimony of Kavanaugh's roommate, who shared a room with him at college, and again he confirms exactly the character that Dr. Blasey Ford has described. Okay, now when we come to Judge Kavanaugh, who's there huffing and puffing with his righteous indignation, absolutely outraged actually that people are actually taking this woman seriously enough to have this Senate hearing, and what does he have to gain or lose according to the outcome of the hearing? Well, one thing, he's hoping to gain a seat as a Supreme Court Justice on the Supreme Court, isn't he? So he's got a very strong motive to lie. He's also got a strong motive to lie in the sense that he doesn't want to admit in front of the world that, yes, that's the kind of person I was when I was, you know, a teenager. He hasn't got the humility to admit to being a loutish youth and to even apologise, you know. And so, according to his testimony, his friend wasn't there, it didn't happen. He's issued the counter-attack that these are malicious allegations on the side of Dr. Blasey Ford, who's issued them as part of some sort of Democrat Party plot against the Republicans, and he's just a victim of that. Well, I've just explained the evidence there. Sorry, according to the balance of probabilities and reasonable doubt, there is reasonable doubt that that accusation can hold, because on the balance of probabilities it is not true according to the evidence. Okay, she is not motivated as part of a Democrat Party political plot, and according to the evidence she's supported in describing him. Now, Kavanaugh is a person who has a known, proven track record of lying to the Senate, to Congress, to the American public on oath. So we know that he's a perjurer. that evidence is irrefutable. Time has told. That evidence that previously he's given to the American public on oath has been proven to have been false. So he lied. He's a perjurer. When it comes to the balance of probabilities and reasonable doubt, there is reasonable doubt then that a known perjurer who's wanting immense power on strength of his lies as a motivation, there is reasonable doubt that his testimony can be taken seriously. At the hearing itself, we also know for a fact that what he said about the Devil's Triangle and boofing and this Renati Illuminati Club, actually he lied. He lied on oath. We know that for a fact at the hearing. Okay? We also have the fact that his supposed best friend is not prepared to come forward and say this attack happened or it didn't happen. His friend, I can't remember. I can't remember. You see. And so it's that again suggests, very strongly suggests, that's evidence, it strongly suggests that Mark Judge, although he might have been a loutish youth along with Kavanaugh when he was 17 years old, and he might have been prepared to even lie to the police, now he's a grown man, he's developed a conscience, he isn't prepared to lie on oath to the American public, even to defend his best friend and help his best friend get on the Supreme Court just as a justice there. Okay, so when it comes to the two parties, then at that hearing, there is reasonable doubt that Kavanaugh is telling the truth. Okay, so therefore Dr. Blasey Ford is telling the truth. The balance of probabilities tells us that Dr. Blasey Ford is telling the truth, and therefore, according to that Senate hearing, then they have to accept that Kavanaugh is probably guilty, because it wasn't a court hearing, but they have to accept he's probably guilty. On the balance of probabilities, and according to reasonable doubt, Kavanaugh is not fit to take a seat as Supreme Court Justice. That's it. Okay? So then when we come to the responses and the decision of the Senate at that hearing, and don't forget, Dr. Blasey Ford gave a very credible testimony, a very emotional testimony, and we have the testimony of Kavanaugh, which actually shows him to be a very vindictive, angry, accusatory person, and we know for a fact it's very common for people who've been accused of a crime to try whatever they can to cast doubt on the person issuing that accusation, okay, and which he does very strongly right from the start, explain that this is a plot, this is a Democrat Party plot against the Republicans. That's what this is all about. That's what he states right from the start. So then we have Senator Susan Collins, who summarises talking about innocent before being proven guilty. Now, she proved, her testimony now is actually proof that Susan Collins has got no understanding of the law, and really she should not have been, she has no business really commenting or even making any decision on that hearing. Because don't forget, you're talking about a hearing about the Supreme Court, so therefore the law does need to be taken into account. You know, this is a legal thing now. And so for her to talk about innocence and guilt purely in relation to Kavanaugh is actually evidence, solid evidence of the Senate's discrimination and bias in favour of Kavanaugh and against Dr. Blasey Ford. So that itself is a very serious thing, because that actually is against human rights, and both parties have full human rights. You know, every court case in a civilised so-called democratic society with a reasonable system of law does, as a foundation of policy, which is the golden rule, okay, because human rights are public policy, and therefore the golden rule comes into play here, and human rights cannot be limited. Otherwise, well, they cannot be limited to the extent that they undermine the prime purpose of those rights. So the prime purpose of those rights is for people to have freedom of speech and expression, to have right to justice and protection, okay, and to be not discriminated against. So Susan Collins' testimony proves that she has discriminated against Dr. Blasey Ford because she does not mention Dr. Blasey Ford in her comments about innocent before being proven guilty. She's quite happy to very strongly suggest that Dr. Blasey Ford is guilty of lying, because she's chosen, actually, no, I'm only going to look at Kavanaugh's innocent, and we don't accept the evidence that's come to the table. We're not operating on the balance of probabilities here. We're operating discriminately and with bias. So Dr. Blasey Ford and her lawyers now should very seriously consider about bringing a case against Susan Collins in particular, and perhaps the whole of the Senate that voted in favour of Kavanaugh in spite of the evidence. She needs to think about bringing a case against them for denying her human rights, for encouraging, insisting on this hearing, in which later on they were going to claim that all the evidence that came to the table could easily be dismissed, in which case there should never be in a hearing. So they've subjected Dr. Blasey Ford to trauma, and, you know, as a result, she's to this day continuing to have to live in hiding. Her family are under threat, and she's still receiving death threats. So that is very serious, and there should be a case brought now, I think, against the Senate, because they have behaved discriminately and they have not operated lawfully on a balance of, on the balance of law. That's why the law is represented by the sword and scales. It's which side the scales fall most heavily. That's the balance of probabilities and the reasonable doubt. If the balance of probabilities falls on the side of Dr. Christine Blasey Ford, then the sword of justice falls down against Kavanaugh. Okay, that's how it is. And so that's the understanding there. I hope that clarifies the situation for people. Now we come to Jamal Khashoggi's case. So again, we have evidence presented to us according to the Turkish government and intelligence, who are claiming they have recordings which they've not released, video and sound recordings that prove, according to them, that Jamal Khashoggi was interrogated, brutally murdered, and his body hacked to pieces and moved out of the Saudi consulate in Turkey in bags and boxes or whatever. And that there was these people arrived there, 15 assassins apparently, rogue assassins according to the Saudi ruling elite, who were saying, no, we had nothing to do with this, we didn't organise this murder, we don't know what's happened to Jamal Khashoggi. But we know that Jamal Khashoggi did enter the Saudi consulate specifically to collect documents that he needed to marry his Turkish-born fiancée, and that he'd arrived at those offices by appointment specifically to pick up those papers. So it wasn't like he'd just gone in on the off chance. It was known that he was going to be attending the Saudi consulate at a particular time in order to collect these documents that he had asked for so he could get married to his fiancée. So it was known. So then we need to consider, well, let's have a look at the defendants here, which are the Saudi elite, who are claiming, no, we had no responsibility for this, it was a rogue assassination group. Well, you look at the Saudi regime and you see a regime that systematically murders people who speak out against it. Saudi citizens, for very minor crimes, you know, which aren't even crimes, but they do not operate on a system of human rights. The women of Saudi Arabia have no rights, okay, very, very few rights. People who speak out against the regime are systematically prosecuted. It's a society that metes out draconian, actually sadistic punishments for crimes that they call crimes, but in the West aren't even punishable. You know, people being stoned to death, limbs chopped off, people being whipped, people being executed, all in public as a public spectacle. So you're talking about a sadistic regime that operates in denial generally of people's human rights, of freedom of speech and expression. And then we look at Jamal Khashoggi, who had fled from Saudi Arabia and took refuge as a refugee in America, and he was a well-known journalist working for a prominent American newspaper and speaking out against the Saudi system, the Saudi regime, and their system of their policies, their public policy that actually doesn't include human rights and does operate very, very sadistically. Okay, so that's evidence. So then we need to ask ourselves, well, how does a rogue assassin group know who is going to be attending the Saudi consulate in Turkey at any given time? How did they get that information? Because don't forget, the consulates are directly representing the nation that they're serving. So, you know, the Saudi consulate in Turkey is representing the Saudi regime. So how did this rogue assassin group receive the information then, if they weren't part of the regime, the Saudi regime? And then we look at the manner in which the killing, as alleged to have taken place, the manner of the killing is very much in keeping with the sadistic type of punishment that the Saudi regime metes out against people who criticise and question them. Which it is in keeping with that, isn't it? The torture, the brutal murder, and, you know, the hacking up of the body. Don't forget, this is a regime that chops limbs off for crimes. So, on the balance of probabilities, even though the Turkish government has not shown us the recordings, they said they can't do it because it would compromise their intelligence, which is fair enough. On the balance of probabilities, we have to accept that it's very likely then that there's reasonable doubt that the Saudi regime is being honest in their opinion that this did not happen, that they did not order it. They don't know what's happened. They don't know what's happened to Jamal Khashoggi. We do know that he entered the Saudi consulate, and we do know that he never left it alive, or even his dead body in a complete form did not leave it. Okay, so therefore, on the balance of probabilities, it is very likely that Saudi Arabia are lying, that they did order this brutal murder of Jamal Khashoggi according to their policies, their present day policies, and they ordered this assassin group. If actually they did not, they have no dealings with this rogue group of assassins that have access to embassies, you know, consulates, and can go in and murder people and immediately leave the country, then that is a serious threat. You're talking about a terrorist group that has such avenues into intelligence that they're able to know who is attending what embassy at what particular time and actually go and murder somebody and then leave the country. That's a serious terrorist threat. So one way or the other, you're talking about a terrorist threat posed by either a rogue Saudi group or a Saudi group that's operating on behalf of the Saudi regime. According to the balance of probabilities, it's very likely that this group is working on behalf of the Saudi regime at their behest. Okay, so on the balance of probabilities, we need to understand that actually, at the moment, according to the evidence available, then there is reasonable doubt that the Saudi elite are being honest. So therefore, we have to accept, as I say, on the balance of probabilities, that they are guilty as it stands now, because this is just a hearing, isn't it? This is the public hearing. Now, then we've got Donald Trump, who's basically come out and said, look, our relationship with Saudi Arabia is exemplary. You know, we hold them in high esteem. They spend a lot of money with us. I have excellent relations with Saudi Arabia. That's what he described. And you know, you can't judge people guilty until they've been proven innocent. Well, I've just explained how this works now on the balance of probabilities, okay? So actually you can. Actually you can. So now, according to the evidence and the balance of law that I've just presented, I request that the professional people involved in law of whatever level and intelligence in America, in Britain, in every nation now, that you professional people, you need to decide which side of the fence you're on. Because what we're talking about here is world leaders who have a misogynist attitude towards women. We know President Donald Trump has his own self-confession as a sex offender, and there's 19 women come forward to cite him as committing crimes against him. There's also 2 women come forward with sworn on oath affidavits that he's also a child abuser, which nobody really, you know, that just seems to have been totally brushed aside. So, you know, we're talking about people that have a track record of negating and abusing women, okay, and who do deny women's rights of autonomy. In Donald Trump's case and his supporters, they want to deny women's rights of autonomy. And these people are basically standing by the Luciferian law of might equals right to do as thy will. You know, we have this whole thing about the bankers. Blatantly, it's been stated in the press in Britain, in America, that the bankers are just too big to prosecute. Apparently, they're too big to prosecute. So again, that is Luciferian law, isn't it? That somebody is so big, so powerful, so wealthy, they can't actually be prosecuted. No matter what evidence stands against them, they can't be prosecuted. They must be allowed to just get away with their crimes because they're too big to prosecute. That's Luciferian law. Might equals right to do as thy will. It is actually a law that permits rape, theft and murder and destruction of our planet. Okay? Because if you're mighty, big and powerful, you can do whatever you like. You see? Now, the other side of the law, the real law, universal law, because there's Luciferian law and then there's universal law that upholds all our human rights and earth rights. Okay? Now, according to that law, right equals might to do as thy will. Are you right? Are you an honest person? Are you a considerate, compassionate, law-abiding person who doesn't go around raping and killing and stealing, who doesn't hold misogynist attitudes towards women and children? Okay? Then you are free. You are free to go about your daily business, to do more or less as you please, because you're a trusted individual. Right equals might to do as thy will. And that is what the professional people of this world and also the global citizens now, you need to stand with one or the other. Because it is a waste of time trying to stand against these powers. You know, we are talking about basically a toddler consciousness in adult male, mostly male bodies. A toddler consciousness in adult bodies that have immense wealth and power. So what you're dealing with then is a monster, aren't you? Because, you know, you put a toddler brain in these adult bodies, give it loads of power, expect every kind of horror to happen, because they're not operating from any sense of balance or understanding. They are living in their own fiction and riding high on the proceeds of crime that apparently they're all too big to be prosecuted for. Okay? Because they're operating by the Luciferian law of might equals right to do as thy will. And actually, our human consciousness, the level of intelligence that we have today in the 21st century, true human consciousness, sane, balanced human consciousness, is at its youth stage. We are at the youth stage. Man, which includes both male and female, go and read it in Genesis. Let us create man. Us create man in our own image, both male and female, to be like us. And set them to tame the earth. Right? Them. Male and female. So man includes both male and female. So therefore, man, now, by the 21st century, we are at our youth stage of consciousness. So therefore, the toddlers are a risk and a threat. It is up to us, as especially Christian people, who Jesus has asked us to love our enemy. Well, we need to understand that part of loving our enemy is also protecting them from committing crimes even against themselves, because they are destroying the very planet that they depend on. We haven't got another one. So, you know, we do need to bring them to justice, even for their own protection, but especially for protection of the children, because the law, universal law, unlike Luciferian law, according to universal law, a child is a VIP. Okay? According to Luciferian law, a child is a minor human being that is insignificant and unimportant. That's why the toddler brains are quite happy to commit all kinds of crimes, you know, bomb areas. They know children are there, to impose things like austerity that do impact very harshly on children, but children are just a minor concern, you see. But according to universal law, the children are VIPs, and they need to come first before we do anything. Their needs, their safety, their rights, we have to put them first. Okay? So that's the choice. That's the choice that the people of this world, and most especially the people, it is beholden on you now. You have responsibility as a person working in intelligence, as a person working in the military, as a person working for the police, or in any capacity in the justice system. You have a choice, and we need to make that choice. Our planet, we have about, I would say at most 15 years to turn things around and actually save our planet. And that is not going to happen at all while we've got these criminals in power operating on their ridiculous law, which actually isn't a law, is it? It's actually a crime against humanity, their law, because it does facilitate the worst kinds of criminals into power. And as we've just witnessed with Judge Kavanaugh being confirmed to sit on a Supreme Court justice, and by a biased and discriminatory hearing. So I hope that what I've explained here does clarify the situation on according to the law, according to where we need to be as a species, because this, you know, we're talking about an existential threat here, and I am speaking on behalf of the children of our planet, of man as a child and as a youth. Okay, and either the youth are going to get strong and find confidence, because as I say, it's no point standing against these people. We stand up for. We stand up for. We stand on the side of universal law, universal intelligence, the quantum golden light energy that actually created everything in this universe. That's a proven scientific fact. That created biological life, that wrote our DNA, that provided this beautiful, beneficent law to protect us, to protect our rights, and to facilitate the kind of world that people live in harmony, that we live like a rainbow. That is the covenant, isn't it? The rainbow covenant. What does it tell us? It shows us colours, a variety of colours, all holding their own. So you've got the blue, the specific red, the specific pink, the specific orange, gently merging at the edges. There's no sharp divisions. There's no sharp dividing lines. All those colours come from one light source. And that light source gave us universal law that upholds our rights, that does not judge children minor, that does not judge children inferior, that does not judge people according to their colour of their skin as to who can be a slave. okay? That all of that is from the Luciferian law that facilitates discrimination and profit. You know, people profit from those discriminatory judgments against humanity, because Luciferian law operates fundamentally on corrupt judgments against humanity that do facilitate crime and the rise to power of criminals. So, you know, that is up to now the people of this earth to understand exactly who we are, what we are as human beings, as biological hosts to the universal golden light intelligence that created us, and as to what we need to do. And as I say, you know, the people who have the power to make the arrests, you need to do it, to bring the charges. The people on the ground, please give your support to the professional people. There is today an amnesty for people who have been persuaded or for whatever reason been complicit in supporting these criminals, or even compelled to participate in their crimes, to come forward, to apologise, be forgiven. There's forgiveness is there. That is what forgiveness is for, is to facilitate people out of crime and into a lawful life, okay? And so yes, we do now need to get strong, and we need to stand up for the law and for the rights of humanity, and therefore the rights of our planet. And you know, our planet does need some serious help, and we are all going to need to roll our sleeves up and focus on that. You know, there's plenty of jobs, we've got plenty of wealth and plenty of jobs available specifically now to making this world a beautiful place, to repairing our planet and actually living in a degree of harmony, the kind of harmony that is shown to us by the Rainbow Covenant of human diversity in unity. You know, we are a diverse species, and the law permits that. The law permits the various faiths and everything, as long as those people are operating lawfully according to universal law. They have a right to be. And at the moment, this criminal banking system that's governing everything, that is, sorry, it is a crime, and it is operating according to Luciferian law. That itself is a crime against humanity. So I hope this clarifies things for people. Thank you very, very much for taking the time to listen. I send my love, and God bless to all.